is going to talk to us. John, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. We can hear you. Thank you so much for taking time out to come join us today. And I understand you have done an amazing job educating people on redlining. So we are turning it over to you, Mr. John.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me be here, letting me talk to you all a little bit. Education, I think, is so important for many reasons. I'm a firm believer that education leads to understanding, and that understanding leads to compassion, and that compassion can lead to action. And so I think that it starts, though, with education. And in the real estate community, we do a good job of educating ourselves about a lot of things related to marketing, educating ourselves on the best way to to do our jobs as well as we can. But I think that there's also an opportunity for us to educate ourselves about what's happening in the world. And I think a lot of us in white America thought that we were living in a mostly post-racial society. We had a Black president for 8 years, and there wasn't a lot of awareness about racial issues. Well, as we're seeing now, in real time, we're waiting on the results about whether there'll be indictments for the police officers involved in the Breonna Taylor case. So there's a lot of unrest in Louisville, as there is around the country and around the world. And I think we're all witnessing in real time the frustration, the anger, and the sadness that we see in the Black community around the country. From the protests to the highest number of murders in Louisville history, what we're seeing unfold is the result of centuries of systemic poverty. Nobody wants to live in neighborhoods where drugs are prevalent, where children and teenagers might get shot, where families are broken, where there are no suitable grocery stores, where homes are literally right next door to liquor stores. But poverty takes its toll. And if you look around the world, you can see that that lack of opportunity leads to results that are unfortunately entirely predictable. Now, I've been a real estate lawyer for 30 years, hard to believe, 31 actually now, focused almost exclusively on real estate law. And so you would think that I would understand real estate law, but only recently did I discover how our government, and not just racist individuals and corporations, purposefully removed opportunities for Black families and individuals to get ahead, especially through home ownership. Now, we in the real estate community, of course, know that one of the most significant factors affecting wealth is home ownership. That's what we're all about. Equity in a home is, of course, the largest asset for most families, and homeowners have on average 80 times the median net worth that renters do. Now, that's good marketing information for us to have for sure. But what some of us don't know, most of us don't know, is that while non-Hispanic white households have on average $139,000 in wealth, Black households have only $12,780 in wealth. Now, differences in salary, which are also real, don't explain this difference in wealth. Household wealth, of course, changes everything for that family. It creates a safety net if there's an illness or unemployment, say if we're in a national or global pandemic. It also creates opportunity, more money for higher education, for a better home, for a safer neighborhood, maybe even a family vacation, or something to leave your kids when you die. Wealth affects everything. So regardless of color, all around the world, people who are poor have problems that wealthy people really cannot understand. And because the disparity of wealth and the disparity of home ownership between Blacks and whites touches everything that we do in the real estate community, I think it's important for us to learn why things are as they are. Now I'm going to hold up a book. You can see that it's well tattered for me. This is sort of my Bible on understanding where we are as it relates to real estate. The Color of Law was written by an economist by the name of Richard Rothstein. And this was published a few years back, and it's entitled "A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America." So a little history lesson. Hopefully everybody's had their coffee, because history is not always the most exciting, but obviously from 1619 until the Emancipation Proclamation, so about 250 years of slavery, Black people didn't own any property, naturally. After slavery ended in the late 19th century and all the way into the 1960s and beyond, the government, all branches, that's executive, legislative, and judicial, and at all levels, and so that's local, state, and federal, encouraged and facilitated segregation and disparities of opportunity between Black and white citizens. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just in the South. It was planned, designed, and executed by our government. Now, during Reconstruction, that time after the Civil War, where many Black families owned businesses and attended schools and owned land, there were significant gains that were made. But those were erased quickly by 1877 in what was known as the Compromise of 1877, which was a compromise to a stalemate about who was going to become president, when the North agreed to pull the troops, the Union troops, out of the South. Once the troops were out of the South, then all kinds of horrors returned, including lynchings, voter suppression, Jim Crow laws, and convict leasing. Convict leasing was something that I can't believe that I never learned about before, but it was the practice of arresting Black people after the Civil War, after emancipation, for made up or petty crimes, things like loitering or not having a job, and then leasing them to private parties, effectively making them slaves once again. And this went on for a long period of time. Now, in 1900, less than half of Americans actually owned a home. That number actually started decreasing between 1900 and 1920. And beginning in 1917, motivated by a fear of communism, the government began encouraging white people to become homeowners as a patriotic duty. They were encouraged to move to suburbs away from African-American families. Now, the New Deal, which we all know about, brought about a lot of wonderful poverty erasing policies, but unfortunately, they only applied almost exclusively to white people. Under the New Deal, the Public Works Administration built the first public housing for civilians. All the projects were segregated by race, and in many instances, neighborhoods that were once integrated were now forcibly segregated. And it concentrated African-American families in low-income neighborhoods. Because most white families couldn't pay cash for a home or get a mortgage without a large down payment, the government created the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which gave people an opportunity to borrow money with mortgages amortized over time. This was something new because banks weren't willing to do that before. So now for the first time, home ownership is possible for middle-class families. But because they wanted to keep the neighborhoods segregated and because they only wanted to make loans to white families, the Homeowners Loan Corporation asked real estate agents to help them to color code neighborhoods. And so neighborhoods with mostly Black residents were colored red for stop or don't invest. White neighborhoods were colored green or invest or go. These designations were purely based on race. They weren't based on the quality of the neighborhood. And then maps were created with these color codes, and that gave birth to what we now know as redlining. So there were literally maps with red lines drawn around neighborhoods that were occupied by Black residents to warn banks not to invest in those neighborhoods. African Americans were now deemed by the government to be too risky for investment. And so naturally, banks and private lenders followed suit, using the same maps for many years to make loans to white people only in neighborhoods that would be occupied only by white residents. Now, FHA, which of course has a significant effect on us today with many, I don't know what the percentage is, but a high percentage of loans are FHA loans, was created in 1934, ensuring bank mortgages. And so now, also a huge change in the industry, banks could take risks on homeowners with small down payments because the government would insure the bank if the borrower defaulted. And of course, that's what the FHA MIP mortgage insurance does. And people wanting to own homes could now afford to get a loan, borrowing money over time. But FHA's appraisal standards would only permit loans to white borrowers. Racially mixed neighborhoods, and sometimes ones that were simply next door to Black neighborhoods, were deemed too risky for insurance. Also, FHA didn't want banks making loans anywhere but in new suburbs. They weren't concerned about credit worthiness, they were concerned about race. Now, the VA followed the exact same redlining rules and the same regulations that the FHA did. FHA's and VA's influence on homeownership cannot be overstated, as those of us who are involved in the real estate world now know. Whites were now able to get loans on fair terms from banks that previously wouldn't take the risk. Blacks, even those with good credit, were not given that same opportunity. Even more impactful, FHA and VA created racially segregated neighborhoods by requiring deed restrictions, not permitting, requiring deed restrictions that excluded African American families. So think about that. FHA and VA requiring deed restrictions that would not allow Blacks to live in the neighborhood. So entire subdivisions were created, and you could only live in them if you were white. Similar restrictions would be the norm around the country. And this created what we now know as the middle class and what it would look like for generations, which was almost entirely white. After World War II, the GI Bill was designed to help veterans with opportunities when they returned to civilian life through education and home ownership. Again, the government chose to give these benefits only to white families. By the time the GI Bill ended in 1956, there were 4.3 million home loans. That's $33 billion in loans made almost exclusively to white veterans. So imagine being Black in World War II in Europe. You're literally fighting alongside, sometimes in a bunker with a white soldier, only to return after war to be treated as a second-class citizen, entirely differently than those you served with who happened to have the skin color of white. Under President Truman, the 1948 Housing Act made things worse for African American families. Public housing was necessary for those who couldn't afford to buy a home, but the act allowed segregated housing facilities. This effectively left African Americans concentrated in high-rise slums with no access to wealth, little access to jobs, which had mostly moved out to the suburbs, and with none of the protections that a safe home and a safe neighborhood provides. Public housing had become a ghetto. Now, this occurred simultaneously with a period of time known as the Great Migration, also something that I never learned about in school, where there was an exodus of 6 million African Americans who moved from the South because they were running away from violence and overt discrimination, Jim Crow laws, lynchings, and little opportunity. And they moved almost exclusively into big cities in the North and in the West. That's how we get St. Louis. That's how we get Detroit. That's how we get Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and Oakland and all the cities that now have large populations of Black residents. They moved during this time called the Great Migration. They were dreaming, hoping, praying for a better life once they moved out of the South. But unfortunately, when they moved, what they discovered was that things weren't much better. State and local zoning laws made things a lot worse. So it's no coincidence that toxic and polluting industries and businesses were zoned into areas that were almost exclusively occupied by African American families. Highways were placed in Black neighborhoods. Deed restrictions or restrictive covenants were created, and the courts enforced them, keeping Blacks out of white neighborhoods. Realtors, unfortunately, made things worse. The governing body at the time, the National Association of Real Estate Board, had a code of ethics that said that, this is code language, a realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood members of any race or nationality whose presence will clearly be detrimental to property values in that neighborhood. So what did that mean? You shouldn't ever bring a Black family into a white neighborhood. Because African American families were legally and practically excluded from loans, many tried unconventional ways to buy homes. Rent to own, which we still see today, contracts for deeds, which we still see today, where the buyer buys over time, became popular around the country, including in our city. Under these agreements, people trying to buy homes would often pay usurious interest rates or would lose their homes after paying for years if they missed a single payment. And that was before 1979. There was a case in Kentucky that prohibited that practice of taking properties back when people skipped or missed a single payment, because under the case of Sebastian versus Floyd, the court said, look, these people have been buying these properties. They haven't been renting them. They've been buying them. And so they deserve the same protections that a homeowner does. And those are the protections that a foreclosure action would offer them that an eviction action would not. So contracts for deed and rent to own up until 1979 in Louisville, and then even longer in other parts of the country, led to the further destruction of houses and neighborhood stability. Now, in the housing crisis of 2008, we learned that many defaulting borrowers had been victims of what's called reverse redlining, where banks and lenders targeted African American borrowers, regardless of their creditworthiness, for subprime loans. Those of you who were in the industry at that time know that a subprime loan is one where the interest rates and the terms were predatory, way above the market rate for most people who were buying a home. When the housing crisis occurred, these homeowners were among the first to lose their homes. We saw this extensively in West Louisville, where property values plummeted, often below the amount that was due on the mortgage, so they were upside down on their loans. Many people who'd made payments for years on their mortgages were and remained trapped. I still see that today. We do a lot of work with Habitat for Humanity. A lot of the properties that they build on are in West Louisville. We've done it long enough in Louisville, over about 30 years, that we've had a number of homeowners that have died. And unfortunately, a lot of them have not left valuable assets to their families. So yes, it's providing a decent place for them to live, a safer place than they were in before, less crowded, a new place. But property values haven't gone up like you would expect them to in most neighborhoods. Now, housing, of course, isn't the only area in which the government has been actively involved in creating devastating disparities of wealth opportunities between Black and white families. And again, if you're interested in learning about other ways, the Color of Law is a great synopsis of that. But because homeownership is so critical to wealth building, and because this is our industry, our real estate industry, it's worthwhile for us to focus on and to try to create change in this area. Now, after I had an article in the GLAR newsletter and also in the Courier Journal, a lot of people reached out to me to say, what can we do? And unfortunately, fixing these disparities is not going to be easy. It's going to take a long time and a concerted effort from really a combination of government, nonprofit organizations, private individuals, and banks and lenders. There are some great nonprofits that are doing really good work here in Louisville, providing homeownership counseling like they do through the Louisville Urban League, River City Housing, and Habitat for Humanity, and a number of organizations are working to try to address some of the issues with some of the systemic poverty. But it's also going to take private individuals and banks and lenders. We have to start somewhere, even though it feels overwhelming. And the fact that our government discriminated against its own citizens, I think, calls each of us to respond in different ways than we would to discrimination that occurred at the hands of private individuals or even corporations. You know, if you or your parents got a loan to buy a home prior to, you know, during the 60s or prior to that, then you and your family benefited from discrimination, period. You benefited from it. And you know, I am my government and you are your government. And I believe that once we are educated about our past and how it affects the world today, then people of goodwill and people of compassion should respond in ways that help to address these disparities. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, I'm a firm believer in this trajectory. Education first. Once we have education, we have an understanding about the way things are. Once we have an understanding about the way things are, then we have compassion for people who have been affected by the way things are. And then with our compassion, whatever our faith background or lack of one, our desire for equity, you know, our whole system is supposed to be based on justice and equality and fairness for everyone. And when we recognize that many individuals have not been the beneficiaries of that, of systems that have benefited everyone, then that leads to action. And so I applaud you all for being interested in this subject, for wanting to address it. I think there are bigger conversations that are happening right now at GLAR and in our real estate community that weren't happening a few months ago. And you know, I think we're at the point where we can either go back to the way we were before and you know, put our heads in the sand and ignore some of the systematic problems that have created disparities of wealth today. Or, and this is what I'm praying that we do, we start to address them. We start to do what we can. There are ways in which we can all help other people. And so that might mean for a real estate agent, representing a Black family and gifting some of the commission back. We're in our firm have partnered with a number of nonprofits, Housing Partnership, River City Housing, the Urban League, and a couple of other organizations where we, for instance, if you go through the home ownership counseling program through the Urban League, we don't charge a closing fee. So there's no title exam fee, there's no closing fee. And so those are ways. I don't say that to brag about what we're doing at all, but there are ways that we can individually chip away at some of the disparities of wealth that have been made present, and that you know, and that we as beneficiaries of a system that have benefited us, you know, it's a way of sort of giving back. And showing some gratitude for the place that we're in. So anyway, like I said, I really appreciate you all listening. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. And I am always happy to have further conversations about it. I'm happy to take questions now if anybody has any. I'm also happy for us to have off record or off the line conversations about it as well. If you have some ideas about ways to address some of these concerns, then please share those as well, because I think it's one of those things that I think that, you know, we want to keep the momentum going. We want to keep the conversation going so that we can continue to address some of these things. So thank you all so much. I really very much appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah.
Hey, John.
Yes.
So I have a question just in regards to what you just said. You don't charge a closing fee in regards to signing up when it comes to that. What's that program called, by the way?
Sure. It's through the Louisville Urban League, and it's a homeowners counseling program.
Okay. So is there a way, clearly the Urban League knows that about you guys.
Yeah.
Is there a way to sign up as a realtor to say, we're willing to give 50% back? Like, I don't have anybody in my sphere that specifically buying in the West End to live in the West End. I'm being very
Yes.
transparent there. I just don't.
Sure.
I just don't have that, right?
Sure.
However, I would love to be able to help and represent somebody and give that back. And, you know, whether it be 50, 100%, whatever that is, I'm all game for that. I love the idea of that. That feels like it would be helpful to somebody that's trying to buy.
Yes.
Or sell even. What does that look like? How do we sign up for that?
That's a great question, Scott. So what I would do is, what I'd recommend is that you contact the Louisville Urban League and ask to speak to someone in their homeownership counseling program. And so what happens is people get referred to the Urban League, and then the Urban League helps them to partner with a realtor, helps them to partner with a lender, helps them to partner then also with us, with Borders and Borders. And so if you let them know that you are willing to represent some of the clients who go through there, and I will tell you, it's not entirely West End properties. There are a number of people who go through the program who qualify financially, and they purchase properties in South Louisville or in more central locations. And so it is, I think it's an outstanding program, and it's the only one of its kind that I'm aware of right now. Housing Partnership, I think, also does these programs too.
So I'm gonna, and I know we could drill down into this for hours, and I realize that I just have a really, since it's topical.
Yes.
And I know Ty was on here. I don't know if she still is. Ty I know sells a lot down in the West End. I know, and I'm bringing up our people of color in our office as a question to this. Like, is that like, oh, Scott's taking away from the opportunity? Like, I'm being extremely transparent, Milt. I love it. I'm trying to have this conversation. Like, is that, oh, Scott's trying to take away opportunity from some of the African American people who specifically work in that area? You know, like, what does that feel like?
Oh, that's interesting you say that, Scott. I would love to answer that.
Yeah, Lisa, please do.
Yeah, so one of the things that I focus on in my business is actually assisting everybody. And it bothers me so deeply that I can go to a listing appointment on the East End of Louisville, and because I am still a Black woman, that my white counterparts will get that listing over me. So you going into West Louisville is going to be the same thing. So if that person is for you, that person is for you. And I've said this a million times, there's enough business for all of us. We need to treat people like people. If you want to go help in West Louisville, Scott, absolutely, positively, there are many, many people that need help. I am going to do 4 listings for very affordable homes, hopefully October 1st. I'm trying to get 6, it's a goal. And they're all from Algonquin to PRP. I am focused on that as something specific right now because of the conversations that I've actually been having. All of these homes are under $150,000. You work in a price point. This is why you're not exposed. We all work in our price point. Again, that's our business model. So you're not taken away from anything. If you have the time and the energy to do this, I encourage all of us to do this because this part has to happen in order for it to change.
Yeah, Thank you. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I agree with Lisa. I'm in the rural areas of Henry and Shelby County, and one of the things that we're facing here is the lack of affordable housing in the county. So, and really is a deeper thing with education. I'm working with the Metro United Way here in Shelby County to educate and get people educated on just getting your credit scores up and doing what you need to do. Because I'm seeing it not only in African American communities, but in the Hispanic communities as well. And I don't speak a lick of Spanish, but I have a lot of people that are Spanish speaking that I work with, and they are being discriminated against even worse in some cases than African Americans are because of the language barrier. So anything that anybody is willing to do, and I'm getting choked up about this because it is so challenging and so hard, and there are so many opportunities out there, but people don't even want to take the time to know or to learn even about something as basic as the USDA Direct program that helps people get into housing. And there are funds out there, but people have to be educated on the basics. And us as realtors, we have got to take the time to educate the public on all levels,
I want to ask a question maybe. Is it possible that maybe we can collaborate, like, where you're like, hey, we have a team, it's not just me, here's Marsha or here's Ty or here's Milton, and we work together to serve you, and if one of us doesn't, you prefer to work with one of us instead, and that way they know like we're allies too, and it's okay if you don't feel like we're the best fit. Just like if I can't speak Spanish, I'd refer to a Spanish speaking colleague. I don't know.
I'm sort of territorial with my clients. I love my clients, so once I get them, I have learned different ways of communicating with them, because there is such a large population of Hispanic people in Shelby County that I've reached out to, to lenders, translators, anybody that I can to help me to communicate, and we've actually been doing pretty well. So, but if I do get someone that, and I ask them up front, if you feel more comfortable with someone that speaks Spanish, I do refer them to people that speak Spanish, but it's with any language barrier.
Hey, Marsha, what if we all learned, or what if we did like Rosetta Stone Spanish and like learned it together? Because I would love to be able to speak.
Love the idea. I'm not doing that.
Mercy.
I'm with you.
It's
Hey,
all I can
Mercy.
do to keep up with real estate. I am not doing that.
I'm with you, girl.
Hey, John. Hey, John. I want to thank you so much for giving this talk. I think
Yes.
I've heard it more than once, and it is definitely impactful every time. Two things that I want to ask you. I know that you have written an article for GLAR that spoke directly to Louisville as you zoom in, because today's talk was more of a national 30,000 foot view. However, you zoomed in to Louisville. Can you speak to that connection to today's thoughts and people's feelings and individuals' anger that is still present?
Sure.
Because I do think that there is a persistent view that racism is a myth.
Yes.
And so if you can speak to that, that'll be great.
Sure. One of the things that really for me was transformative was I went to see Sadiqa Reynolds, who's the president and CEO of the Urban League. I went to see her give the commencement speech at Simmons College. This was a few years back. And Sadiqa Reynolds, who is was a judge and a lawyer, I honestly consider her a prophet in many ways. She is as grounded, as kind, as professional, an individual as you're ever going to meet. And she, in the commencement speech, talked about her experiences in her lifetime of racism and how they continue to this day. I was one of a handful of people in the audience who were white. Every single person, and I mean every single person in the audience, reflected back to Sadiqa that they had experienced the same thing in their lives. That they, you know, on a daily basis experienced aggressions, micro or otherwise, that they could never, that would never allow them to forget the color of their skin. And I remember coming out of that thinking, okay, I have to intentionally choose not to believe Black people if I'm going to believe that we're in a post-racial society. Because all the people that I am now connected to, especially through the Urban League, who are Black, are telling me that they experience it on a daily basis. And I would have to intentionally choose to not believe Black people if I believed otherwise. I have a friend, some of you may know Harry Pickens, who lives in our community. Harry's about 6'7", African-American. He is like the living embodiment of a combination of Buddha and Jesus. He's a jazz pianist. He is as peaceful a soul as anybody that I've ever met. You know, I've had conversations with him on all matters of spirituality. And he tells me that when he goes to the grocery store, he gets followed in the grocery store because he's Black. And as somebody who lives in a mostly white neighborhood and practices in a mostly white industry, it's hard for me to understand that because I didn't have experience in it. But, you know, the protests that are happening today, the levels of frustration that we're seeing and the sadness that we're seeing in Black individuals and families across the country speaks volumes about the experiences that Black people have on a daily basis. And so when people get frustrated at protests and get frustrated with, you know, people that are marching in the streets, they don't have an understanding about what it's like to be, you know, to be Black in America today, because our society is so segregated. Our industry is segregated. Our neighborhoods are segregated. Lord, our churches are segregated. Because of that segregation, we have a lack of experience with each other. I'm a firm believer in relationship as a healing mechanism. And we heal through relationships. But if we don't have meaningful relationships with people that are different than us, then we don't have an opportunity for understanding. And remember what I mentioned a couple of times, I think understanding is what leads to compassion. And so, you know, I really am hopeful that the conversations that we're having like this one and the clamoring in the street, you know, which I mean, certainly there have been acts that are indefensible, but you know, the studies have shown that well over 90% of the protests have been nonviolent protests. And so, you know, I think it's really, we need to be careful when we in white America talk about looting and violence in protests when it is the exception and not the rule. So anyway, I don't know if that addresses, Milton, what you had hoped I would, but I just want to say, I see you. I believe you. You know, I know that what you experience and what Black people in America experience is different than what I experience.
I definitely appreciate that, John, and your sensitivity to the subject, your willingness to study. I definitely appreciate that, and I hear you as well. I definitely appreciate that.
Thank you.
This has been, I'm watching these comments. I have never on a team meeting, since we've been doing Zoom, seen so many chat comments and statements, and it's pretty obvious that everyone's on this call's heart has been touched somehow, some way. And Amy texted me a while ago and talking about how much, and we were talking about how much we love our people, and we love them so much because they're willing to sit, listen, and be a part of the conversation. And these conversations will need to continue. My eyes were opened. I thought they were already open, but I think they were just slantly open. But thank you so much, John, for being a part of this. And thank you everyone for being on this. And we will have some more conversations. This will happen some more. So thank you all for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And thank you all so much for your willingness to address this. I applaud you.
Yes.
Hey, guys, yes, and one last thing before we all go, if we can, if you can keep Louisville, our city, in your prayers, as they are going to announce the Breonna Taylor decision. This has been obviously a divisive and very passionate subject for a lot of people all over the world, and the eyes are on us. And so you can just keep ourselves in your prayer. And as you're out traveling and all that, this is a very sensitive time for our community.
Absolutely.
All right. So thank you guys. If you need us, we're here, and we love you and we appreciate you so, so much. So thank you, John.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.